They say silence means safety. That if you don't hear anything, nothing can hurt you. That night, I believed that lie. I thought I was alone. The house told me so. But silence doesn't always mean emptiness. Sometimes, it means someone is listening. I thought I was alone because belief is sometimes easier than truth. The house looked the way a house should look when no one else is around. Lights were low but warm, not switched off in haste, just dimmed enough to suggest comfort. The air felt settled, like it had already accepted the night. Nothing moved. Nothing challenged the story I had been told. She said he would be gone. Just for the night. No follow-up explanation, no unnecessary reassurance. We never dealt in details. Details carried weight, and weight could sink everything we were pretending wasn't fragile. I stepped inside quietly, closing the door with care. The sound it made felt too loud even though it wasn't. Silence has a way of magnifying guilt. I slipped my shoes off and stood still for a moment, listening. The house wasn't empty. It was filled with presents. Shoes by the entrance. A jacket folded over the back of a chair. Framed photographs lining the hallway. Her smile beside a man who belonged here in ways I never would. I didn't look too closely. There are truths you survive by not examining. She hadn't come down yet. I stood in the living room, hands in my pockets, breathing slowly, letting my eyes adjust. That was when I heard it. A sound from upstairs. Not loud, not clear, just enough to register. A shift, a movement, something adjusting its weight. My body reacted before my mind did. My shoulders tightened. My breathing slowed. I told myself it was nothing. Houses make noises. Old floorboards stretch. Pipes respond to pressure. That explanation had worked for me before. Still, the silence afterward felt wrong. Not empty, occupied. I called her name. Not the one on her mailbox. The one that existed only between us. She answered from upstairs, calm, unhurried, telling me she'd be down shortly. Her voice steadied me, but only partially. I stayed where I was, staring at the staircase, aware of how quickly certainty can fracture when doubt whispers instead of shouts. That was the first time I wondered whether belief was something I chose rather than something I earned. When she came downstairs, she moved as if nothing were wrong. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. She poured herself a drink, leaned against the counter, and spoke with the ease of routine. Anyone watching us would have seen nothing unusual. That was her strength, her ability to make disorder look like calm. But I noticed the small things. The way her eyes avoided the staircase. The way her fingers tightened briefly around the glass before relaxing. The way she shifted her weight as if grounding herself. You heard something, she said. Not a question. I nodded. It's nothing, she replied, too quickly. I wanted to accept that. Wanting made staying easier, but the house refused to settle. Every sound felt louder than it should have been. The hum of electricity, the faint creak of wood. Privacy no longer felt guaranteed, it felt borrowed. I asked if he was really gone. She said yes without hesitation. The answer came smoothly, but it sounded practiced. Like a line delivered before. Like something rehearsed until it no longer trembled. Leaving then would have been the right decision. Clean, responsible, predictable. But responsibility doesn't survive well in rooms like this. It dissolves quietly. She stepped closer, closing the space between us. The unease softened, replaced by warmth, by familiarity. That was her power. She could pull attention into the present and make it feel complete, even when it wasn't safe. Still, the tension didn't disappear. It changed shape. It settled deeper. I realized then that I wasn't afraid of being caught. I was afraid of being wrong. Time slowed in that house. We talked quietly about nothing important, work, passing thoughts, things that filled space without demanding honesty. Each pause felt deliberate, stretched thin by listening. Then the house reminded us again. A sound from upstairs. Clearer this time. She stopped speaking mid-sentence. Our eyes met. We both heard it. Neither of us said a word. That silence was a decision. To stay. To ignore. To proceed without confirmation. Lines don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they allow you to step over gently, then close behind you without sound. I realized then that part of her needed the risk. Not to be caught, but to feel something sharp in a life dulled by routine. And standing there, complicit and quiet, I learned something uncomfortable about myself. I was capable of choosing desire over clarity. The house felt heavy, as if it were holding its breath along with us. Every creak felt loaded, every second stretched longer than it should have. Eventually, I stood to leave. Not because the tension broke, but because it didn't. She didn't try to stop me. She never did. Control mattered to her, and letting me go was part of that control. At the door, I looked back once more. The house had gone quiet again, convincing, calm, cooperative. Too cooperative. Days passed, then weeks. We never spoke about that night, but it reshaped everything. Our messages grew careful. Pauses lingered longer. Certain topics vanished entirely. Silence became a shared language. She stayed anonymous, not out of fear, but out of survival. Being known carried consequences she wasn't willing to face. I understood that, not because I was noble, but because anonymity protected me too. We met again after that, in places where walls felt less watchful. Hotels, apartments borrowed for an evening, spaces designed to forget what happened inside them. But nothing ever matched the tension of that first night. That night had weight. I found myself thinking about houses more often. About what they hide. About how much privacy depends on belief rather than certainty. Locks don't protect secrets, people do. The memory followed me longer than I expected. Not because of what happened, but because of what almost did. Because of the sound we didn't name. Because of the question we never asked. Some nights, I wondered if there had really been someone upstairs. Other nights, I wondered if the idea alone was enough to explain everything. I never asked. Eventually, we drifted apart. No argument, no dramatic goodbye, just fewer messages, longer gaps, and finally, nothing. That's how most secrets end, not with exposure, but with distance. She wasn't caught. Her life continued as it always had. Mine did too. We carried on separately, each holding a chapter that never made it into conversation. Sometimes I think about that house. About the silence that felt crowded. About the sound we pretended not to hear. I thought I was alone that night. What I learned instead was how easily people choose not to listen. How silence can hold entire stories without ever speaking them aloud. And how anonymity isn't always about hiding from others. Sometimes, it's about hiding from yourself. Disclaimer: this story is a work of fiction written for mature audiences. All characters are anonymous, and any resemblance to real persons or events is purely coincidental. The story explores emotional tension and personal choices, not explicit content. Some stories don't end with confrontation. They end with distance, with unanswered questions, with silence that lingers longer than truth ever could. She was never caught, and I never asked, because some nights aren't meant to be explained, only remembered. If this story made you pause, if it reminded you of a moment you never talk about, then you're not alone. Subscribe for more powerful, anonymous, true-to-life stories where silence speaks louder than words. More stories are coming.